Today's video is going to be the most important video you have ever seen, and I promise the visuals I'm going to show you and the breakdown with numbers is going to show you that for certain the power of compounding can change everything for you. Now, if you have dreams of not only changing the financial future for your kids, but maybe even your kids' kids, then stick around until the end. Now, the concept that we're going to be going over today is simple yet very effective. We're talking about investing into a very high quality dividend growth ETF, and for this video's example, we're going to be using my favorite high-quality dividend growth ETF known as SCHD, or the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. And while investing into an ETF like this one or like others over a long enough time frame, the outcome can honestly be unimaginable with even a relatively small amount of money invested. And for this video's example, we're talking about just $10,000. Now, if this interests you at all, make sure to please drop a like down below, stick around, and let's get into it. Now, like I said a minute ago, you could really turn a relatively small amount of money into a massive net worth over a long time frame with many different stocks and or different ETFs. But for this video's example, we are going to be going through my favorite and my largest ETF holding. I currently have around 500 shares of SCHD throughout my portfolios, and we'll be adding many more shares before the end of the year. Now, the reason the SCHD ETF is a great example of how an everyday investor could turn a small amount of money and compound it over time into a massive sum is because the SCHD crosses off some of the most important qualities. Now, some of these things are the fact that SCHD is a low-cost fund, costing investors only 0.06%, and believe it or not, there are some ETFs out there that charge 10 or 20 times more than this, making SCHD's expense ratio one of the cheapest across the entire market. Now, also, SCHD has a strong basket of stocks, a strong basket of holdings that all have a few things in common. They all pay dividends and have continued to pay dividends over a long time frame, and also on top of that, very important, very important, they pay more and more in dividends over time, making the majority of the portfolio have a pretty healthy dividend growth rate. Now, also, all the holdings within the SCHD ETF is the total return of the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index, which is a pretty strict index that we've went over in previous videos and explained how hard it actually is for an individual stock to even enter the index. But on top of that, for an ETF to pass the criteria, in my opinion, to be a good long-term buy and hold vehicle that can turn a relatively small amount of money into a massive amount of money, this ETF is also going to have the potential to grow in actual ETF price over time. And as you can see in the case for the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, this ETF is up around 170% plus over the last, say, 10-12 years, and that's not even including dividends. Now, don't get me wrong, there's other ETFs across the market that also have grown just as much as this over the same time frame, or maybe even more. So once again, I just want to preface this by saying that the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF is not the only ETF that an investor could buy into by any means. But with the low expense ratio, the really high quality basket of holdings, the growth potential, and the actual ETF price, there's only a few other things missing for an investor to buy into sort of the perfect ETF to do what we're looking for. Now, what's left is none other than dividends. The SCHD ETF has around a 3.76% forward starting dividend yield, somewhere in that range, up to around 4% depending on where you've been buying it as of recently. So with well north of a 3.5% dividend yield, an investor is going to be getting paid a significant amount of dividend income on a consistent basis pretty much from day one. Because believe it or not, a lot of the other high quality dividend growth ETFs across the market, like the S&P 500 for example, only has a starting dividend yield of somewhere of around 1.5%. So with the 3.76% starting forward dividend yield that SCHD is offering, plus what's most important in my opinion, now this is the real key here, the dividend growth rate. Now, dividend growth rate is basically how much the dividend is paying year over year over time. Now, looking at the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF's dividend growth rate, I'm sure you guys already all know this, but look at these numbers. Over the last 10 years, on average, 11.11%. Over the last 5 years, 13.69%. 3 years, 11.44%. And for the more visual learners out there, look at how much on a quarterly basis the SCHD ETF has been paying investors since all the way back till 2011. What's crazy is that investors that bought into SCHD, say just 10 years ago, were getting paid around 25 cents or a quarter on a quarterly basis. Now those same investors are earning anywhere from around 60 to 70 cents on a quarterly basis, and that's just within 10 years. Now, with the nice, healthy starting dividend yield and this super healthy dividend growth, you're probably already understanding where we're getting at here. You're understanding that with the growth of the ETF and how much this ETF pays you consistently over time, you can probably only imagine how much a relatively small amount of money invested into a super high quality dividend growth ETF like this could turn into if the investor stays invested long enough. Now, speaking of exactly that, the title of the video explains that an investor could turn a relatively small amount of money, say $10,000 starting, into life-changing money for their kids and their kids' kids. And I promise you, I'm not lying. So right here in the dividend calculator, we have a $10,000 initial starting principal. Now on top of the initial $10,000 starting principal, this example is going to be showing $6,000 of annual contribution added to more SCHD on a yearly basis. Now I can already hear some investors listening to this saying that, well, I can't afford to add $6,000 a year into more shares of SCHD. And maybe some of you are watching this thinking to yourselves, well, I can probably add up to $10,000 more of SCHD per year. But the cool thing about a dividend calculator is that you can of course go through and change the numbers to match your own situation. But for this example, we're going to be going with $10,000 starting, $6,000 per year, quarterly distribution and dividend reinvestment turned on, which means all the dividends that are going to be getting paid out are going to be used to purchase more shares of SCHD. Now on top of that, we're talking a 4% annual dividend yield, which is somewhere pretty close to where SCHD is offering right now, depending of course where it's trading, an 8% annual dividend amount increase, which is somewhere in the median of what we've seen, 3% annual share price appreciation, and 40 years invested. So if you happen to be watching this video right now and maybe you have kids or you're planning on having kids, and one of your main goals in your life is to set your kids up, or maybe even your kids' kids, build massive wealth for your family. So the numbers are in, and get ready to have your mind blown from the power of compounding over time. So the initial $10,000 principal investment into SCHD is going to earn an investor around $406 per year. That's not changing my life. That's not changing your life. That's not changing our kids or our kids' lives by no means. By year number two, $16,600 after that annual contribution. Now we're up to $700 in annual dividends. Now skipping down a little bit because none of us have all day here, $40,000 invested as far as principal goes by year number 5 and almost $2,000 of annual dividends at this time. By year number 10, this investor would have $92,000 invested already. So if this investor was 20, by age 30, they'd already have almost 6 figures invested into SCHD and a basket of SCHD that's paying them around $6,000 per year. Now by year number 15, this investor would have around $177,000 in principal and $14,000 per year in dividends. Now keep in mind, just a side note, if an investor wanted to make an annual contribution that's higher than $6,000, these numbers are only going to go up and compound faster. And of course, if an investor wanted to start off with a smaller amount of money, or maybe even make smaller contributions, it might take a little bit more time, but the numbers are still going to be shocking, I promise, over the long term. Now by 20 years in, this investor would already be to $329,000 and $33,000 in dividends. By year number 28 or 30, this investor would cross the $1 million principal mark. So it would take around 30 years for this to compound into over $1 million. And now we're talking almost $150,000 per year in dividends. And by year number 29, $181,000 in dividends. Now from year number 30 to year number 40, the numbers get massive because at this point, if an investor was to reinvest all the dividends, let's just say in theory, it would of course buy that investor so many more shares of SCHD for this example, which also are going to pay so many dividends per quarter and per year. So for year number 30, $1.3 million and $224,000 per year in dividends. By number 35, $3.2 million and almost $700,000 per year in dividends. And by year number 40, we're talking $9.2 million. This is real wealth right here, and $2.5 million more or less in dividends. So that right there explains the exact power of compounding taking place over time. You can see right here that even though things might start off slow, as long as the investor stays with it for long enough and keeps reinvesting, the way that I like to say it is that they just stay down and do not come up for air until they're ready to. The numbers are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But now I want to hear from you guys down below when it comes to investing long term and building out a portfolio for not only you, but maybe for your kids and your kids' kids. What is your number one favorite stock or ETF that you're looking to buy as of right now to get you there? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.